Welcome to Silent Screams, where darkness, whispers, and terror await you. Are you ready to confront your fears? Story 1: The Forgotten Door. Jenna Harper had always been drawn to the eerie and unexplained. As a freelance journalist with a focus on urban legends, she thrived on uncovering the truths behind the mysteries. When she heard of the abandoned Blackthorn Manor on the outskirts of her hometown, she couldn't resist. The manor was said to be cursed. Locals whispered about disappearances, strange sounds, and above all, the forgotten door, a hidden portal to something unspeakable. These tales were exactly what Jenna sought for her next article. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a notebook, she ventured to the crumbling house one late autumn evening, eager to investigate. The manor loomed before her, its Gothic architecture silhouetted against the darkening sky. Vines crawled up its facade like veins, and the windows stared out like hollow eyes. As Jenna stepped onto the creaking porch, she felt the weight of the place, as if the house itself was alive and watching her. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, carrying the scent of mildew and decay. Peeling wallpaper revealed strange carvings etched into the wooden walls, symbols she didn't recognize. The floor creaked beneath her boots as she explored, the sound echoing ominously in the vast silence. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, she found an old journal. The name on the cover read Eleanor Blackthorn, the last known owner of the manor. The entries detailed Eleanor's growing obsession with a mysterious door hidden in the house. The whispers grow louder. One entry read, "They call to me, promising answers, but at what cost?" Jenna's heart quickened. The legend of the forgotten door was real, and she intended to find it. Jenna returned the next night, determined to uncover the truth. The journal had mentioned the basement as the likeliest location of the door. But as she descended the narrow staircase, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, almost imperceptible, a soft susurration like leaves rustling in the wind. She paused, shining her flashlight into the shadows. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling slightly. There was no response, only the persistent whispering. She reached the basement, where the air was colder and heavier, as if the walls were pressing in on her. Her flashlight illuminated a small alcove at the far end of the room. There, partially obscured by debris, was a door. It was smaller than she expected, made of dark, aged wood, and covered in carvings similar to those upstairs. She crouched to inspect it, running her fingers over the strange symbols. They felt warm to the touch, as if alive. Suddenly, a child's laughter echoed behind her. Jenna spun around, her heart racing. But the room was empty. She turned back to the door, her hands trembling. The journal had warned her, the door remembers those who seek it. It will call them back, no matter how far they run. Ignoring her rising fear, Jenna decided to open it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Jenna hesitated. The whispers grew louder, forming faint words, "Come home." She tightened her grip on the flashlight and stepped inside. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling deeper into the earth. The air grew colder with each step, and the walls, carved with more of those symbols, seemed to pulse faintly. At the bottom, she found a cavernous chamber. The floor was covered in a mosaic of symbols, glowing faintly in hues of green and gold. At the center of the room stood a large, cracked mirror. Its surface shimmered like water, distorting her reflection. Jenna approached cautiously, her breath visible in the freezing air. As she drew closer, her reflection stopped mimicking her movements. Instead, it smiled, a cold, menacing grin that didn't match her own expression. She stumbled back, heart pounding. Before she could react, the mirror began to ripple. A shadowy figure emerged from its surface, its form twisting and writhing as it took on a humanoid shape. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. The figure, now fully formed, stood tall and skeletal, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly. It reached out a clawed hand toward her. "You shouldn't have opened the door," it rasped, its voice 1,000 whispers in unison. Jenna turned and ran. But the stairs were gone. The passageway twisted endlessly, the walls closing in around her. Her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. She screamed, the sound swallowed by the whispers. Behind her, the entity's presence loomed, its steps echoing unnaturally. Desperate, Jenna clawed at the walls, trying to find a way out. She stumbled into another chamber, identical to the first. The mirror stood before her again, but now her reflection was gone. In its place was the shadowy figure, staring back at her with those hollow, glowing eyes. Jenna fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered. "Let me go." The entity laughed, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You opened the door. You belong to us now." Jenna's world spiraled into chaos. The manor twisted into an endless maze, its corridors filled with echoes of her own screams. Every door she opened led back to the mirror, where her reflection now looked gaunt and lifeless. The entity followed her relentlessly, its whispers a constant reminder of her mistake. Time lost all meaning. Days, weeks, maybe even years passed. But Jenna was trapped, forever hunted by the shadow she had unleashed. Months later, a group of urban explorers ventured into Blackthorn Manor, drawn by the same rumors that had lured Jenna. They found her camera in the basement, the footage intact. The last frame showed Jenna standing before the mirror, her face twisted in a silent scream as a shadowy hand reached out to pull her in. As the explorers reviewed the footage, the whispers began to fill the room. One by one, they turned toward the mirror, where Jenna's reflection now stared back at them, her hollow eyes glowing faintly. Story 2: The Whispering Void. The old Barton house sat on the outskirts of Willow Creek, cloaked in an aura of decay and neglect. To the locals, it was nothing more than a ruin, a hollow shell of its former grandeur. But to those who dared to venture near, it was a place of inexplicable coldness, of whispers in the shadows, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. For decades, no one dared cross its threshold, save for the occasional thrill-seeking teenager. Most who entered came back shaken, their tales of ghostly figures and unsettling sounds dismissed as mere fabrications. Emma Greaves, a journalist with a penchant for uncovering the unexplained, saw Barton House as an opportunity. Recently assigned to write a piece on urban legends, she decided to investigate the infamous house, accompanied by her skeptical friend, Mark, and tech-savvy photographer, Claire. She embarked on a journey that would uncover truths far darker than any legend. The trio arrived at Barton House just before dusk. Its facade, though weathered by time, still bore traces of its past opulence. Gargoyle carvings leered from the corners, and ivy snaked up its crumbling walls. The air felt heavy, laden with a metallic tang that clung to their tongues. "Creepy," Mark muttered, adjusting his backpack. "Why do these places always smell like old pennies?" Emma ignored him, her focus on the task ahead. She pushed open the warped wooden door, which groaned as if resisting their entry. Inside, the air was colder, the silence so profound it pressed against their eardrums. Claire set up her camera and began snapping pictures. "This place is a goldmine for eerie shots," she said, her voice tinged with nervous excitement. As the sun dipped below the horizon, strange noises began to echo through the house. At first, they dismissed the creaks and groans as the house settling. But when Claire's camera captured a faint shadow darting across the frame, their skepticism wavered. "It's just a trick of the light," Mark insisted, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. Emma, however, felt a growing unease. She couldn't shake the sensation that they were not alone. By midnight, the house's malevolence became undeniable. The whispers began, soft at first, like distant murmurs carried on the wind. But as the hours passed, they grew louder, more distinct. "Leave," a voice hissed, sending chills down their spines. "Did you hear that?" Claire whispered, clutching her camera tightly. "It's just the wind," Mark said, though his trembling hands betrayed him. Emma followed the whispers, drawn to a door at the end of a long hallway. Behind it lay a study, its walls lined with books coated in decades of dust. At the center of the room stood a desk, and on it rested a leather-bound journal. When Emma opened it, the pages seemed to move on their own, settling on a specific entry. "The void calls to me. It whispers promises of power but demands sacrifice. I fear I have gone too far." The words sent a shiver through her. Suddenly, the room's temperature plummeted, and the door slammed shut. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of voices, all shouting a single word: "Run." Panic set in as the trio tried to leave. But the house had other plans. Hallways twisted and stretched, leading them in circles. Doors that once opened freely were now locked, and the whispers became mocking laughter. Claire screamed as her camera's flash revealed a figure standing at the end of a hallway. It was humanoid but wrong, its limbs too long and its face an abyss of darkness. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, but its presence left an oppressive dread. "We have to get out of here," Mark said, his voice cracking. "I'm trying," Emma snapped, frantically pushing against a door that refused to budge. "The house is alive." Their attempts to escape grew increasingly desperate. The whispers began to invade their minds, dredging up memories they had long buried. Mark heard his deceased father's voice, accusing him of failure. Claire saw visions of a childhood accident she had tried to forget. Emma felt an overwhelming guilt she couldn't place, as if the house knew her deepest secret. Exhausted and terrified, the trio found themselves back in the study. The journal lay open, its pages now blank. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep, resonant, and filled with malice. "One of you must stay," it said. "Stay?" Claire repeated, her voice shaking. "What does it mean?" The figure reappeared, standing in the doorway. Its featureless face seemed to shift, forming the contours of their own faces before melting back into darkness. "Choose," the voice commanded. Emma's mind raced. The house demanded a sacrifice. but she couldn't bring herself to suggest leaving one of her friends behind. As the figure advanced, she made a split-second decision. Grabbing the journal, she screamed, "Take me!" The figure stopped. The room began to distort, the walls dissolving into a swirling void. Mark and Claire's screams faded as Emma was pulled into the darkness. Mark and Claire woke up outside Barton House, the sun rising on the horizon. The house was gone, replaced by an empty field. They remembered everything but couldn't explain how they had escaped. Emma was gone, her sacrifice etched into their memories. Weeks later, Claire reviewed her photos. In every shot, faint shadows lingered in the corners, growing clearer with each image. The final picture showed Emma standing at the window, her eyes filled with sorrow as she whispered a single word: "Run." Story 3: The Lament of Blackwood Hollow. The letter arrived on a damp October morning, its edges frayed as though it had traveled through decades rather than days. Meredith had not been to Blackwood Hollow in years. Not since her grandmother's funeral when she was a teenager. The invitation bore her name in elegant, swirling script and an ominous request: return home before it's too late. Blackwood Hollow wasn't a home. Not in any sense she cherished. It was a decaying Victorian manor nestled deep in the woods, its silhouette jagged and imposing against the ever-grey sky. Meredith's memories of the place were fractured and cold, like the creaking floorboards beneath her childhood steps. Yet, something in the letter, the subtle desperation in its ink, compelled her to return. By dusk, she was behind the wheel of her car, the road narrowing with each passing mile until the towering black trees of the hollow consumed her. When she arrived, the house greeted her with the same eerie familiarity. The windows were dark and hollow, and the faint smell of damp earth and mildew clung to the air. The first strange occurrence was the sound. A faint, mournful wail that seemed to emanate from within the walls. It was distant but undeniable, as though the house itself were grieving. Meredith brushed it off as wind funneling through the rotting wood. But deep down, she knew better. The first night was restless. Meredith's room, once hers as a child, felt suffocating. The wallpaper peeled like old skin, revealing a lattice of cracks beneath. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, when she heard it again, the low wail. This time, it was closer, resonating through the floorboards. Meredith's instincts screamed at her to leave, but she felt anchored by an unseen force. The letter had promised answers, and she wasn't ready to leave without them. Grabbing a flashlight, she ventured into the hallway. Shadows danced erratically, as though the light was struggling to pierce them. The wailing grew louder as she descended the staircase, leading her toward the cellar door. It was ajar, a thin slice of blackness yawning beyond. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. No answer, just the unrelenting lament. She pushed the door open, the ancient hinges groaning in protest. The flashlight beam revealed a staircase spiraling downward into the cold earth. As she descended, the wail became a chorus of whispers, indistinct yet maddening. Words seemed to form, slipping through her comprehension like water through fingers. At the bottom, she found an old trunk covered in strange, arcane symbols. Her grandmother's name was carved into its lid. Meredith hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a tattered journal and an ornate key. The journal's pages were filled with her grandmother's handwriting, recounting nights of terror, shadows that moved on their own, voices that cried out in the dead of night. and the feeling of being watched. The journal revealed a grim history. Blackwood Hollow wasn't merely haunted, it was cursed. Generations of her family had lived there, each plagued by the same entity, a spectral figure known only as the Weeper. According to the journal, the Weeper was bound to the house by a ritual performed long ago, a desperate act to save the family from financial ruin. But the price had been steep, eternal servitude to the spirit. Meredith's hands shook as she turned the pages. Her grandmother had tried to undo the curse but failed. The final entry read, "To free us, the bloodline must end. Or, the key must find its door." As she pondered the cryptic words, a chill swept through the cellar. The whispers ceased, replaced by a deafening silence. Then, the door slammed shut. Meredith's flashlight flickered and died. She fumbled in the darkness, heart pounding, until she felt it, a hand, cold and skeletal, brushing against her arm. She screamed, bolting up the stairs. The door at the top wouldn't budge. Behind her, the whispers began anew, louder and more insistent. The Weeper was near. By dawn, Meredith resolved to end the curse. The journal hinted at a keyhole hidden within the manor, one that the ornate key would unlock. But it didn't say where. Armed with the journal, she scoured the house, each room revealing more of its sinister nature. Walls bled black ichor. Mirrors reflected things that weren't there. In the parlor, she found an old photograph of her grandmother standing with a group of strangers, all holding hands in a circle. Behind them, etched into the wooden floor, was the same arcane symbol from the trunk. Meredith realized the keyhole wasn't hidden in a wall or door, it was part of the house itself. That night, she recreated the circle in the parlor. The whispers grew frenzied as she placed the key at the center. The air turned icy, and a figure began to materialize, the Weeper, its face obscured by a veil of shadows. "Why do you stay?" Meredith demanded, her voice trembling. The Weeper's reply was a guttural hiss, "Bound. Betrayed. Forgotten." Meredith's heart ached with unexpected empathy. She offered the spirit a bargain: she would help free it if it promised to end the curse. The Weeper hesitated, then nodded once. The ritual was perilous. Following her grandmother's notes, Meredith recited an incantation, her voice steady despite the growing cacophony of screams and wails. The house trembled, its walls cracking as if the entity's rage was tearing it apart. The Weeper appeared within the circle, its form writhing and unstable. Meredith drove the key into the center of the symbol. The ground beneath her split open, revealing a chasm of blinding light. A force pulled at her, threatening to drag her into the abyss. "It's over," she cried. But the Weeper's voice echoed in her mind, "Not without blood." Realizing what was required, Meredith hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the circle. Pain seared through her as the light engulfed her. The whispers ceased, replaced by an overwhelming silence. When the light faded, the house was still. The Weeper was gone, and the oppressive weight that had hung over Blackwood Hollow for generations was lifted. But Meredith was nowhere to be found. Months later, the hollow was sold to a young couple. They marveled at the beauty of the restored manor, unaware of its dark history. On their first night, as they unpacked, a faint, mournful wail echoed through the walls. Meredith's sacrifice had ended the curse, but some remnants of the hollow's darkness would never truly fade.